Get out! I screamed, my voice cracking under the weight of my fury. The sound echoed through the apartment, bouncing off the walls like a broken symphony of betrayal. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't breathe. I stood there, shaking, my hand pointing at the door. I said, "Get out!" Ethan stood frozen, his face pale. "Wait, please." His voice was soft, pleading, the same voice that used to make me feel safe. Now it made my skin crawl. "Don't you dare!" I took a step forward, my heart hammering in my chest. I could barely see straight. "You don't get to explain this. You don't get to stand there like you're the victim. You cheated on me, with her." My throat burned, and I felt like I could explode. "My sister!" Ethan winced, guilt etched across his face. "It wasn't supposed to happen. Stop!" I shouted, cutting him off. "Do you think that makes it better? Do you think I care about your excuses?" I laughed bitterly, but it felt hollow. 5 years, Ethan. 5 years of my life. And for what? For you to throw it all away behind my back? Tears welled up in my eyes, but I blinked them away. I wouldn't cry in front of him. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. He ran his hands through his hair, pacing like a caged animal. "It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I spat the words like poison. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is burning dinner. You didn't accidentally sleep with my sister." He stopped pacing and looked at me, desperation in his eyes. "I didn't want to hurt you." Those words snapped something inside me. My heart felt like it shattered all over again. I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "You didn't want to hurt me? You destroyed me." For a second, the room fell into silence. The only sound was my ragged breathing. I could feel the weight of everything, the lies, the betrayal, the years of love that suddenly meant nothing. He reached out toward me, and I flinched back, like his touch was fire. "Don't touch me." He pulled his hand back slowly, and I saw the realization hit him. He'd lost me. For good. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I loved you, Ethan. I gave you everything. And you made me feel like I wasn't enough." My voice cracked, and for a moment I hated how vulnerable I sounded. "You are enough," he whispered. His eyes were glassy now. "More than enough." I shook my head. "Then why wasn't I enough to stop you?" His silence was deafening. There it was, the truth. I wasn't enough for him, no matter how much I gave, no matter how much I loved. I turned away, staring at the door. "Leave." He didn't move. "Please, don't end it like this." I clenched my fists, feeling the anger swell again. "You ended it the second you touched her, not me." I turned to face him, my expression cold. "Now leave, before I start hating you even more." His shoulders slumped as if the weight of my words crushed him. Slowly, he moved toward the door, hesitating as he reached for the handle. He looked back at me one last time, as if hoping for some miracle, some sign of forgiveness. There was none. The door clicked shut behind him, and the silence that followed felt suffocating. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space where he'd stood, expecting to feel relief. Instead, I felt hollow, like someone had carved a piece of me out and left me to bleed. I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. My chest tightened as the first sob broke free. The tears came in waves, each one heavier than the last. I didn't fight them anymore. The betrayal, the pain, it poured out of me, unstoppable and cruel. I thought about the nights we'd spent together, planning our future, dreaming of forever. Lies. All of it. He'd been mine, and now he was hers, my sister's. The pain twisted into something darker, anger, resentment. How could she do this to me? I wiped my face and sat up straight. My tears were drying, but the fire in my chest wasn't going out. If they thought they'd broken me, they were wrong. They had taken my heart, but they wouldn't take my future. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I still remember the first time I saw him. It was one of those moments you don't expect. An ordinary day that suddenly feels like destiny has intervened. I was balancing 2 coffees and a stack of papers, rushing through the office lobby, when someone bumped into me. Everything went flying: the coffee, the papers, my pride. "Oh no, I'm so sorry," a deep, warm voice said. I looked up, frustrated and embarrassed, ready to scold whoever was so careless, until I saw him. Ethan. Tall, with tousled dark hair and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. There was something magnetic about him, something that made my anger dissolve like morning mist. "It's fine," I mumbled, kneeling to pick up the papers. He crouched down next to me, our hands brushing briefly. I felt a spark, a jolt that made me freeze for a moment. "Let me help," he said, his tone gentle but firm. That was the beginning. A small moment, barely a blip in the grand scheme of things, yet it became the story I thought would define my life. From that day, everything changed. He found excuses to bump into me at work, shared elevator rides, random coffee breaks, and soon, those excuses turned into real reasons to see each other. Our first date was at a little Italian restaurant tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. I still remember how nervous I felt, fidgeting with my bracelet while he smiled at me from across the table. He told me stories about his childhood, his dreams of traveling the world, and his belief in love. That real, earth-shaking kind of love that could change your whole life. And that's exactly what it felt like with him. Life-changing. He wasn't just my boyfriend. He became my best friend. We had our inside jokes, late-night drives with no destination, and lazy Sundays wrapped up in blankets, watching movies and pretending the outside world didn't exist. Every moment felt warm, like I'd finally found my home. I remember the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, like I was the only person who mattered. He made me feel like I was everything, and I believed him. I believed that what we had was unbreakable. We talked about our future constantly. We'd stay up until dawn, dreaming out loud about the house we'd buy, the kids we'd raise, and the adventures we'd have. "Someday, I'm going to marry you," he whispered to me one night as we lay tangled together under the stars. I laughed and brushed the hair from his face. "Is that a promise?" "It's more than a promise," he replied. "It's my destiny." I smiled so wide my cheeks hurt. In that moment, I didn't need a ring or a grand gesture. His words were enough. I knew that our love would last forever. But as I sit here now, thinking about all those memories, they feel like shards of glass pressing into my skin. Everything I thought was real, the promises, the plans, it was all built on a lie I didn't see coming. Looking back, I wonder if there were signs. Little things I missed because I was so blinded by love. Maybe the way he'd sometimes go quiet when my sister was around, or the way he'd change the subject whenever I talked about setting a wedding date. But I brushed it all aside. I trusted him completely. He was supposed to be my future. I gave him every part of me, my trust, my dreams, my heart. I loved him in a way that left no room for doubt, and I thought he loved me the same. I remember the day we went ring shopping, even though it wasn't official yet. We laughed as we tried on ridiculous bands, pretending to be married already. He'd squeeze my hand and say, "One day soon." God, I was so sure. I could already picture the ceremony, the flowers, the music, the vows. I even imagined Clara as my maid of honor, standing by my side. Back then, she was my closest friend, the person I trusted most. If only I had known. It wasn't just love that connected me to Ethan. It was the dream of building a life together. I wasn't just in love with him. I was in love with our future. But the future I pictured is gone now, shattered into pieces I can't put back together. And the hardest part? Knowing that while I was dreaming of forever, he was making plans with someone else. Someone who shared my blood. Someone I once trusted with every secret. Even now, it's hard to reconcile the Ethan I fell in love with and the man who betrayed me. Sometimes I wonder which version of him was real. Was he ever the man who looked at me like I was his whole world? Or was that just part of the lie? I gave him everything, and I thought it would be enough. But it wasn't. And no matter how much I replay our story in my mind, I can't change the ending. The first time Ethan met Clara, I was so proud. Proud of him, proud of her, and proud of the life I had built that somehow felt so perfect. It was Thanksgiving, and I had invited him to meet my family for the first time. I remember the way his hand gripped mine as we walked up the front steps to my parents' house. He had been nervous, Kept asking what my dad was like, if my mom would like him, if Clara would be home for dinner. "She'll love you," I'd said with a laugh, brushing the lapel of his jacket. "They all will." When Clara opened the door, the two of them locked eyes. It was brief, so brief that I almost didn't notice, but there was something about the way they looked at each other that made my stomach twist, though I quickly pushed the feeling aside. Clara greeted him warmly, flashing the same radiant smile she always had. She hugged me, complimented Ethan's haircut, and told us both how happy she was that we came. The night was warm and full of laughter, but there was this strange, fleeting tension that I couldn't quite place. Ethan had always been good with people, charming without being overbearing, kind without trying too hard. And Clara? She was the kind of person who could light up any room she walked into. She was effortlessly captivating, with her quick wit and contagious laugh. It was easy for anyone to be drawn to her. But that night, as I watched Ethan laugh at one of Clara's jokes from across the dinner table, I felt a strange flicker of unease. The way his eyes lingered on her just a second too long. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. But I saw it. I brushed it off as paranoia, some irrational fear that wasn't worth entertaining. Of course he's looking at her. She's funny. She's my sister. I'm imagining things. I told myself this over and over, forcing the doubt away. I didn't want to be that person, the insecure girlfriend who reads too much into things. And besides, Ethan loved me. He had told me 100 times, in 100 different ways. Still, I found myself watching them more closely as the night went on. Every glance, every smile, every laugh. Clara had always been a flirt by nature, but I knew her heart. She would never cross that line, right? She loved me too much for that. We were sisters, best friends. And Ethan? He was mine. But there was one moment I couldn't forget. After dinner, when everyone had gone into the living room, I went to the kitchen to grab more drinks. When I came back, I paused in the doorway, unnoticed for just a second. Ethan and Clara were standing close, laughing about something. His hand brushed her arm, just for a moment. It was nothing, and yet everything. I froze, feeling something sharp twist in my gut. When Clara saw me, her smile didn't falter. She waved me over, as if nothing had happened. Ethan turned, and the warmth in his eyes returned when he looked at me. I told myself I was overreacting, but I wasn't. The first real fight Ethan and I ever had was a few days later. We were watching TV at my apartment, and I couldn't shake the image of his hand brushing Clara's arm. It played over and over in my mind, like a haunting memory I hadn't invited in. "Did you think Clara was funny?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my heart was pounding in my chest. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, of course. Why?" I shrugged, staring at the screen but not really seeing it. "I just noticed you two were really hitting it off." He turned to face me fully, his expression confused. "She's your sister. Of course I'm going to be nice to her." I felt my cheeks flush. "It's not just that. I saw how you looked at her." There it was, out in the open. The words hung between us like a storm cloud. Ethan's face hardened. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about." My voice was quieter now, but I could feel the tension building. "I saw the way you smiled at her. The way you—" I stopped myself, suddenly unsure if I sounded ridiculous. He shook his head, letting out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Are you serious right now?" "Yes." My voice cracked. "I'm serious." Ethan leaned back against the couch, rubbing his temples. "She's your sister. I'd never—" He trailed off, looking at me with frustration and something else. Hurt, maybe. Or guilt. I folded my arms, trying to steady my breathing. "I know it sounds crazy, but I felt it, Ethan. I know what I saw." He stood up, pacing. "You're being paranoid. This isn't fair, to me or to her." I swallowed hard, feeling a mix of anger and shame. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was letting fear get the best of me. But that moment in the kitchen, I couldn't unsee it. I stood too, blocking his path. "Just tell me the truth. Did you feel— something?" He looked at me, and for the briefest second, I thought I saw hesitation in his eyes. But then he shook his head again, more firmly this time. No, you're the one I love, no one else. The weight of those words pressed down on me, but instead of comfort, I felt hollow. He kissed my forehead, his hands gentle on my shoulders. Trust me, he whispered. I nodded slowly, even though something inside me was screaming not to. I wanted to believe him so badly that I forced myself to ignore the warning signs. Love demands trust, right? And I loved him more than anything. But deep down, a seed of doubt had already taken root. And once doubt begins to grow, it's almost impossible to stop. It happened on a quiet Sunday morning, the kind of morning that was supposed to be simple and peaceful, the kind where you wake up late, make coffee, and stay wrapped in blankets for hours. I remember the way the sunlight filtered through the curtains, warm and golden, painting the room in soft light. I had no idea that everything I thought I knew was about to come crashing down. Ethan was still asleep beside me, his chest rising and falling steadily. I reached for my phone to check the time, smiling to myself as I imagined our lazy plans for the day. But when I unlocked the screen, the first thing I saw wasn't the time. It was a notification, a text message that lit up the screen. It wasn't mine. It was Ethan's. His phone had buzzed right next to mine on the nightstand, and the message preview glowed innocently. Last night was unforgettable. Can't wait to see you again. Clara. For a second, I couldn't breathe. My mind refused to make sense of the words. I blinked, convinced I'd read it wrong. Clara? No, that wasn't possible. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the screen, the words burning into my memory like a brand. Without thinking, I grabbed his phone and swiped to open the message thread. And there it was, a series of messages that confirmed my worst nightmare. Clara, I wish you were here now. Ethan, soon, I promise. Clara, you make me feel alive. Ethan, you're everything I need. Each message was a dagger to my chest, each word slicing deeper than the last. My hands started shaking as I scrolled up, seeing how far back it went. Weeks, months. Their conversations were filled with stolen moments and hidden plans, memories they had built together behind my back. I felt like the room was spinning. My sister, my own sister. Ethan stirred beside me, his arm brushing against my leg, and I pulled away like his touch burned. My vision blurred with tears as a wave of nausea hit me. I couldn't stay still. I needed to move, to do something, or I was going to shatter completely. I stood up so fast that the bed creaked beneath me. Ethan blinked awake, rubbing his eyes, still half asleep. Hey, what's going on? I turned to face him, holding up his phone like a loaded gun. My voice came out cold, trembling with rage. Explain this. He sat up, confused at first, but then his eyes darted to the phone in my hand, and I saw it. The fear, the guilt. It was written all over his face. Ethan. My voice cracked as I forced the words out. It's her, Clara. His face went pale. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He didn't need to say anything. I already knew. The silence was his confession. I let out a bitter laugh, one that didn't sound like me at all. You're not even going to deny it, are you? He reached for me, panic flashing in his eyes. Please, it's not what you think. Don't! I stepped back, my voice rising. Don't you dare try to twist this. I read everything, Ethan, every word. You lied to me, over and over again, with her. My breath hitched as I said it, as if saying her name made it all more real. He stood up, his hands raised like he was trying to calm me down. I didn't mean for this to happen. I let out a strangled sob, fury and heartbreak tearing me apart. You didn't mean for it to happen? You chose this. You chose to betray me, to destroy me. I wiped angrily at the tears streaming down my face. Was I not enough for you? 5 years, Ethan. I gave you everything. And this? This is how you repay me? He took a step closer, his voice desperate. I love you. I never wanted to hurt you. I felt something inside me snap. I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a framed photo of us smiling together on vacation, and hurled it at the wall. The glass shattered, raining down in tiny shards, and the sound was like a release of everything building inside me. Don't you dare talk about love! I screamed. "You don't get to say that after what you've done." Ethan flinched, but I didn't care. I wanted him to feel a fraction of the pain he had caused me. "You destroyed everything, everything I believed in." My voice cracked again, and I hated how broken I sounded. I was confused," he said weakly, and I laughed bitterly through my tears. "I didn't want to hurt you or her." "Stop lying," I shouted, my voice raw. "You wanted her, and you took her, and now you're standing here like some helpless victim, as if this just happened." For a moment, we stood in silence, the weight of everything between us too heavy to bear. I could see the regret in his eyes, but regret wasn't enough. Nothing he said could fix this. Nothing would ever make this right. I pointed to the door, my whole body trembling. "Get out." Ethan hesitated, tears welling in his eyes. "Please, let's talk." "No." My voice was sharp, final. "There's nothing left to say. You made your choice. Now live with it." He stared at me for a long moment, like he was memorizing my face. And then, slowly, he nodded. He grabbed his jacket and walked toward the door, his steps heavy. He paused as he reached for the handle, but I didn't care. I wouldn't let myself soften. Not now. Not after everything. When the door finally closed behind him, the room fell into a deafening silence. The photo frame lay shattered on the floor, like the pieces of my heart. I sank onto the couch, my body shaking with sobs I couldn't hold back anymore. I had lost two of the most important people in my life in one moment. Ethan was gone. And Clara, she was gone too, in a way that felt even worse. But as I sat there, gasping for air through my tears, one thought pushed its way to the surface. This is the end of them, but not the end of me. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon, a day that felt like any other, but one that would change everything. I had gone to the park with a book in hand, hoping to clear my mind and soak in the fresh air. The town's coastal breeze was cool, and the golden leaves crunched beneath my feet as I walked along the trail. There was something peaceful about being surrounded by nature, hearing the distant crash of the waves and the laughter of kids playing nearby. For once, I felt steady. I found an empty bench near the pond, sat down, and opened my book. The sunlight reflected off the water, creating ripples of light that danced in the air. I lost myself in the story, grateful for the escape. Then I noticed him. A man was sitting on the next bench, staring out over the water. He was tall, with dark, slightly tousled hair, and a contemplative look on his face. His clothes were simple, just a plain sweater and jeans, but something about him stood out. He seemed familiar, though I couldn't place where I'd seen him before. He turned slightly, and our eyes met. There was something in his gaze, something steady, but searching. I offered him a polite smile, and to my surprise, he smiled back, warm and genuine. "Nice day, isn't it?" he said, his voice calm, almost soothing. "Yeah," I replied. "It feels like the world finally slowed down for a minute." He nodded, his eyes drifting back to the water. Sometimes we need that, a pause, to remind ourselves we're still breathing. I closed my book and looked at him more closely. "Rough day?" He chuckled softly. "Rough year." I laughed, though the sound was tinged with understanding. "I know the feeling." We sat there in silence for a moment, the quiet between us surprisingly comfortable. "I'm Nicholas," he said after a while, holding out his hand. I hesitated for a second, then shook it. His grip was firm, but gentle. "I'm Olivia." For some reason, I almost felt self-conscious saying my own name. We talked for a while, about nothing in particular at first. The weather, the town, the books we liked. I learned he was new to the area, visiting to reset after some personal challenges. I didn't pry. I knew what it felt like to need a reset. But there was something different about him. The way he listened, the way he didn't rush to fill the silence. It was like he wasn't in a hurry to be anywhere else, and that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. By the time the sun started to set, I realized we'd been talking for hours. The sky was streaked with orange and purple, and the air had grown cooler. "I should get going," I said reluctantly. Nicholas stood too, his hands in his pockets. "Thanks for today. It was nice talking to you." I smiled, feeling an unfamiliar warmth in my chest. Yeah, it was. As I turned to leave, he called after me. Hey, Olivia? I stopped and looked back. He hesitated, then asked, Will you be here again tomorrow? I felt my heart skip in a way it hadn't in months. Maybe, I said with a playful shrug. The next day, I went back. And the day after that, Nicholas was always there, waiting, like he knew I'd come. We started meeting in the park every afternoon, and our conversations became the part of my day I looked forward to most. He didn't pry into my past or ask about my pain. He was just there. And for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just surviving. I was living. One day, he showed up with coffee and pastries from a little cafe I loved. Thought you could use something sweet, he said with a grin. We sat side by side on the bench, our shoulders brushing slightly. You're full of surprises, I teased. Nicholas looked at me then, more serious than I'd ever seen him. So are you. There was something in his tone, something heavier than usual. I frowned slightly. What do you mean? He exhaled slowly, like he'd been carrying a secret he wasn't sure how to share. I haven't been entirely honest with you. My heart stilled. Oh no, not again. He ran a hand through his hair, nervous for the first time. My name is Nicholas Grant. I blinked, the name ringing a bell, and then it hit me. Nicholas Grant, the CEO of one of the largest tech companies in the world. A man whose name was in headlines and magazines. A billionaire. A man who, by all accounts, was unreachable. Untouchable. My pulse quickened. Wait, what? He smiled, almost apologetically. I didn't want you to know. I didn't want this. He gestured between us. To be about that. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. You've been pretending this whole time? No, he said quickly. I wasn't pretending. I just didn't want you to see me the way the world does. I wanted to be normal, even if it was just for a little while. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath me. Part of me wanted to be angry, but as I looked at him, the nervous way he waited for my reaction, I couldn't find it in myself to feel betrayed. He wasn't Ethan. He hadn't lied to hurt me. Why? I asked softly. Nicholas hesitated, then said, Because you treated me like a person, not like someone to impress or use. You didn't care who I was. You just cared. Tears stung my eyes. After everything I'd been through, I had guarded my heart so fiercely. And yet, here he was, someone who could have had anything, anyone, and he chose to sit on a park bench and talk to me. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. So, what now? I asked. He stepped closer, his gaze steady. That's up to you. And in that moment, I realized that life was giving me another chance, not just at love, but at something real. Something I could choose, without fear or doubt. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel scared. I smiled through my tears. Then let's see where this goes. The weeks that followed felt like stepping into an entirely new world. My life, once clouded by betrayal and pain, started to bloom in ways I hadn't imagined. Nicholas didn't sweep me off my feet with grand gestures or promises. He showed up every day with quiet consistency. And that meant more to me than anything. Our days together felt simple but profound. Morning coffee runs turned into long walks on the beach. Quiet dinners became filled with laughter that came so easily, I forgot what it was like to feel broken. He didn't just make me feel special, he made me feel understood. There was no pressure, no rush. For the first time, I felt like I had control over my own story. But being with someone like Nicholas wasn't without its challenges. His name carried weight, and no matter how much he tried to shield me from it, the world had a way of sneaking in. One morning, I woke up to headlines plastered with photos of us at the park, grainy shots of us smiling, sitting close. Tech tycoon's mystery woman, who is she? The article speculated about our relationship, throwing my name into a spotlight I never asked for. I stared at the screen, feeling the familiar sting of anxiety in my chest. Memories of betrayal resurfaced like ghosts, the whispers of, who's she? And what does he see in her? that always seemed to echo louder when you were already doubting yourself. Nicholas found me sitting on the couch, phone in hand. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked softly. I nodded, swallowing hard. I didn't expect all of this. I gestured to the headline. He sat down next to me, his hand covering mine. Neither did I, but none of that matters. Not to me. I met his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity. No pity, no doubt, just him. But it matters to them, I said quietly. People are going to talk, judge. He squeezed my hand. People always talk, Olivia, but you don't owe them anything. You don't have to prove your worth to anyone. His words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I'd let others define how I saw myself. Ethan's betrayal had made me question whether I was ever good enough. But Nicholas wasn't asking me to be anyone other than myself. Slowly, I nodded. You're right. And for once, I felt like I really believed it. In the following days, the gossip faded into background noise, and I focused on what mattered, living. I started taking steps to rebuild my dreams, the ones I had once buried under fear and heartbreak. I went back to my passions, writing, traveling, rediscovering the things that made me feel alive. Nicholas encouraged me every step of the way, but he never tried to take credit for my progress. You're doing this for you, he said one evening as I shared a new project idea with him. Not for me, not for anyone else. That became my mantra. One weekend, Nicholas invited me to a charity gala in the city, a massive event filled with wealthy elites and journalists eager for a story. At first, I hesitated. My instinct was to hide, to avoid the attention. But Nicholas smiled and said, You don't have to go if you don't want to, but if you do, I'll be right there with you. Something in me shifted that night. I didn't want to run anymore. I didn't want to live in the shadows of fear and what-ifs. So I put on a simple black dress, pulled my hair back, and walked into that ballroom with my head held high. People stared. Of course they did. But instead of shrinking under their gaze, I stood taller. Nicholas never let go of my hand, but I didn't need him to hold me up. I felt strong on my own. At one point, I excused myself to get a drink. As I stood by the bar, a familiar voice called my name. I turned, and there he was. Ethan. I froze for a moment, my heart skipping in a way that wasn't painful anymore, just surprising. He looked different, tired, almost hollow. Olivia, he said again, softer this time. I met his gaze, and for the first time, I didn't feel that old ache. Instead, I felt free. Ethan, I replied, my voice calm. What are you doing here? He smiled bitterly. It's a small world, I guess. I wasn't expecting to see you. I shrugged. Life has a way of surprising you. He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. I heard about you, and Nicholas. He paused, as if struggling to find the right words. You look happy. I tilted my head slightly. I am. Ethan's eyes dropped to the floor. I'm glad. You deserve that. I didn't say anything at first. I watched him, this man who had once meant everything to me, and realized that I no longer needed his approval or his apologies. I hope you find your happiness too, Ethan, I said finally, meaning every word. He nodded, though the sadness in his eyes remained. Take care, Olivia. You too, I replied. As I walked away, I didn't look back. Nicholas was waiting for me by the entrance, his eyes lighting up when he saw me. I smiled and took his hand, feeling the warmth of his touch. Later that night, as we drove home under the city lights, I leaned back in my seat, watching the world blur past the window. I had closed the door on my past. I had forgiven myself for trusting the wrong people, and I had learned how to trust again, but on my terms. Life wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. It was mine. And for the first time in years, that was enough. A year had passed, though it felt like an entire lifetime had unfolded since that moment in the park. The girl who sat alone with a broken heart was a distant memory, someone I could still feel sympathy for, but no longer recognized as myself. The coastal town, which had once been a temporary refuge, had become home. My life, once filled with heartache and regret, now brimmed with purpose and quiet joy. I'd built something that was mine, a life shaped by my choices, my passions, and my strength. I opened a small bookstore and cafe by the shore, a cozy space filled with warm lighting, shelves of my favorite books, and the smell of fresh pastries. It became a place where strangers gathered to read, laugh, and share their stories. Watching it grow felt like watching myself grow, slowly but surely. Nicholas was by my side every step of the way, but he never overshadowed me. He'd show up in the mornings with coffee in hand, sitting at the counter while I opened the shop. Sometimes he'd help me wipe down tables or stack books, and the sight of someone so powerful doing something so simple always made me smile. But our life wasn't about grand gestures or expensive gifts. It was about quiet moments that made my heart feel full. Sunsets on the beach, cooking dinner together while dancing to old songs in the kitchen, waking up to find him reading quietly beside me as the morning light filled the room. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. One evening, we decided to close the cafe early and take a walk along the shore. The sky was painted in shades of pink and gold, and the waves lapped gently at our feet. I slipped off my shoes and let the cold water rush over my toes, laughing at how it tickled. Nicholas watched me, a soft smile on his face. "I don't think I've ever seen anyone look so happy just standing still," he said. I shrugged playfully. Sometimes standing still is the best way to appreciate everything. He stepped closer, taking both of my hands in his. "You've taught me that," he said quietly. "You've taught me a lot of things." I tilted my head, curious. "Like what?" He took a deep breath, his expression turning serious but warm. "Like how to slow down, how to be present, how to love without holding back." My heart swelled at his words, and I squeezed his hands. "You've taught me too. You showed me that love doesn't have to hurt, that I deserve to be happy." For a moment, we just stood there, watching the waves. And then Nicholas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My breath caught in my throat as he slowly knelt down in the sand. "Olivia," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I didn't come here looking for love. I came here trying to find myself. But somehow, in the process, I found you, and you've changed my life in ways I didn't even know I needed." Tears welled in my eyes as he opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring with a single, stunning diamond. The setting was simple but elegant, just like us. "I don't want to live another day without knowing you're mine and I'm yours in every possible way. Will you marry me?" For a second, the world seemed to stop. The ocean, the breeze, the sky, it all faded away until there was nothing but him and the overwhelming feeling of home. A tear slipped down my cheek as I smiled. "Yes," I whispered, my voice trembling. 1,000 times, yes. Nicholas stood, laughing softly as he slipped the ring onto my finger. He pulled me into his arms, spinning me once as I laughed through my tears. The world came rushing back. The sound of the waves, the salty air, the sky turning darker as the stars began to appear. We stayed on the shore until the first stars dotted the sky, talking about everything and nothing, imagining the life we would build together. And for the first time, my future felt like an open road, not something shaped by pain, but by hope. Months later, our wedding was held at the very spot where we first met, the park bench by the pond. It was small and intimate, with only the people who truly mattered. I didn't need a grand ceremony or a ballroom filled with strangers. All I needed was him, and the life we promised to build together. Clara never came. I didn't expect her to. Forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It was about letting go of its power over me. And I had. I wished her no harm. I just wished her away. When I stood there, holding Nicholas's hand as we exchanged our vows, I felt a peace that I'd never known before. The girl who had once begged for love had become a woman who knew her worth. I wasn't just someone's wife or someone's sister. I was me, whole, happy, and free. After we said our vows, Nicholas whispered, "Ready for forever?" I smiled, my heart full. I've been ready for a long time. And as we walked away, hand in hand, I knew that I wasn't just walking into a marriage. I was walking into a life I had chosen for myself. One built not from the ashes of betrayal, but from the courage to begin again. And that was the happiest ending I could have ever imagined.